Welcome everybody to the ARCAP webinar. The first thing I just want to do is an acknowledgement of country. We'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we meet on today. We pay respect to their elders past and present. We acknowledge the continual connections First People have with their culture and their country, and we welcome any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here joining us here today. Sometimes people pop where they are in terms of which Aboriginal land they're on. I'm on Gadigal country in Sydney. Do let us know in the chat where you are. If there's anything interesting you want to share also around that topic. We'll come on to the next slide. Hello to Melbourne. Thanks for people sharing, keep it going, that's lovely to see. We're beginning today with a really interesting topic. So welcome everybody to the latest in a series of webinars developed by Aspect's Research Centre for Autism Practice. The topic today is actually asking us a question. The question is, what is self-compassion and could it be important for improving the mental health of autistic adults? So I really hope that by the end of the presentation today that we will know a little bit where we are in terms of answering this question, and I'd be looking forward to hearing from you around that question as well. Now, we know that mental health is a really important area of research for everyone, especially now, but it is something I think which is really important for autistic adults. And whilst we try and change the factors that might cause mental health challenges, things like stigma, discrimination, bullying, isolation, environments not built for autistic people, I think it is perhaps also good to equip people with the kinds of skills that might work for them to improve their mental health. So hopefully that's some good context for today. We'll just move on to a statement of inclusion. I just want to acknowledge that we're a diverse group here and that everybody, all of you present, are welcome in this meeting. We want you to feel like you can be yourself in the chat, whoever you are. The great thing about the setup of today is that in this webinar format, we can't see you, so you can sit at home in your PJs and be as comfortable as you like. But if there is anything that we can do as hosts of the meeting to help you feel welcome and included, please do let us know in the chat. The agenda for today is as follows. When I was reading this, I looked at that first question, how do you treat yourself? And I wasn't sure what it meant. So I'm looking forward to hearing from Lydia about that. Is it just generally, how do you treat yourself? Or how do you treat yourself? You know, a cup of tea and a scone or something like that, a taco and a tequila, whatever it is for you. So hopefully that will be interesting. Find out a bit more about that topic, but particularly diving in more specifically to self-compassion, why this might be important, and some hearing really from Anna about the lived experience of using this idea, particularly with autistic adults as well. We'll talk a little bit more about the mental health of autistic adults, and Ru will talk us through the study that is happening at the moment and what the next steps might be. Fantastic. A few introductions and then we'll get going. Our presenters are Lydia Brown. Dr. Lydia Brown is a clinical psychologist, an academic at Trobe University and the University of Melbourne, and her research focus is on resilience, specifically around self-compassion and how it might help us navigate life's challenges. Lydia completed postdoctoral training at Harvard Medical School, and her research has featured in many wonderful places across the globe in media, including the Chicago Tribune and Reuters Health. So please do welcome Lydia, and we'll hear from Lydia first up. Next is Anna Gould. Anna is a 38-year-old autistic woman who was diagnosed as an adult in 2014. Anna, with 3 other people, run Australia's largest group for autistic women and non-binary individuals. That is the Australian Autistic Asperger's Women/Non-Binary Group, where they aim to provide a safe and supportive space for our online community, and Anna has lots of lived experience and has been practicing self-compassion since 2016. So I look forward to hearing more from Anna. Our last presenter is Dr. Ru Ying Cai. Ru is fast becoming the Troy McClure of the Aspect webinar series. You may have seen Ru in the previous webinar talking around inclusive banking. Ru is a postdoctoral research at ARCAP and GDPA research supervisor at Monash. Ru has a cluster of interests around this topic, particularly factors and skills that might allow autistic people to have better mental health. This is things like emotional regulation. I read a really great paper by Ru on that topic. Things like tolerance of uncertainty and self-compassion. So we have, I think, a really wonderful group of 3 people talking us through this topic today. So without further ado, we will get on and watch the recorded presentation and hopefully have lots of interesting thoughts, comments from you in the chat. We'll see you in a little while. Thank you.
I'd like to start by welcoming you all to this webinar. It is a privilege to have the opportunity to talk about self-compassion, a topic that I have been researching as an academic for 10 years. Self-compassion is also something that I have learnt for myself over the years, and it's had a very big impact on my life. And in my work as a clinical psychologist, a big part of what I do is working with people to help them learn to be kinder to themselves and their thoughts, feelings, and actions. So, what is self-compassion? To understand self-compassion, I'd like you to take a moment to think back over the past week or two and think back to a small mistake that you might have made. For example, perhaps you burnt dinner, or you forgot to do a chore. So think back to some minor mistake that you might have made. If you've got pen and paper, feel free to even write it down, or you can just think about it in your mind. Next, I would like you to think about how you reacted to that mistake. So what types of words or thoughts did you say to yourself when you made that mistake? For example, if you burnt dinner, you say, oh, well, it's not a big deal, let's get takeaways. Or were you a bit crueler to yourself? Do you say, oh, you idiot, why did you burn dinner? You shouldn't have done that, you know better, what's wrong with you? So what kind of thoughts did you say to yourself? Feel free to write that down if you've got pen and paper. And also think about how you felt in your body when making that mistake and afterwards. So did your body feel relaxed? Did you feel calm? Or did you feel tension in the body? Maybe your heart might have been racing, or shallow breathing. So how did you feel in your body? Okay, now I'd like you to think about if a friend had made the same mistake and they were telling you about it. How would you treat them? They told you, oh, I burnt dinner last night. What would you think about them, and what advice would you give them? And in general terms, finally, I'd like you to think about how you treat yourself compared to how you treat others. So who are you kinder to and why? So when I go through these questions with people, and I have many, many times over the years, a lot of people will tell me I am pretty hard on myself, especially when things go wrong. A lot of people will say it's easier to be kinder to others than it is towards myself. This is where self-compassion comes in. So what is self-compassion? Well, self-compassion is a relatively new concept in the world of psychological sciences. So it was introduced and research began in this area back in 2002 with psychologist Dr Kristin Neff. And she defined self-compassion as a healthy way of relating towards the self when facing difficulties. So what we can see from this definition is self-compassion becomes relevant when things go wrong, or for those difficult moments in life when we are not feeling good. So to make self-compassion a bit easier to understand, and also when we look at how it is defined scientifically, we know that self-compassion has 3 key ingredients. And I'll talk through each of the 3 in a bit of detail now. So the first ingredient of self-compassion is common humanity, and the opposite of common humanity is isolation. So common humanity is the capacity to feel connected to others when we're going through a challenge or when we're feeling bad. So I'll use another example of things not going well. Say you woke up out of bed in the morning and you just felt really flat, you didn't want to get out of bed, and you felt quite downhearted and blue. So common humanity is this idea that, you know, a lot of people are struggling at the moment. I'm not alone. So feeling connected to others during a difficult moment, like waking up feeling bad. So the opposite of common humanity is isolation, feeling very alone, lonely, disconnected and isolated when facing a challenge. So with the difficulty getting out of bed in the morning example, you might just feel like you're the only one. Everyone else can get out of bed, but I'm the only one that's struggling, and you feel alone. So common humanity versus isolation. And some of my research and that of others has found that this ingredient of self-compassion might be the most powerful. It's incredibly important predictor of well-being. So the next ingredient is self-kindness, and the opposite of self-kindness is self-criticism. So self-kindness looks at how you treat yourself in your thoughts, your feelings and your actions. So difficulty getting out of bed in the morning, a self-kind thinking might be, this is a really challenging time in my life, but also in the world. May I be kind to myself? The opposite, self-criticism, is, you stupid idiot, I can't believe you can't get out of bed, you've got so much to do, you're so lazy. So this is a self-critical response. Now, the final ingredient of self-compassion is mindfulness. And mindfulness is a general term. In the realm of self-compassion, we're looking at how you relate towards a difficult moment right then and there in the moment. So mindfulness is the ability to take a step back and have perspective. So if you wake up feeling blue, it's the capacity to step back and realize, oh, I'm having a bad day today, and to see that for what it is. The opposite of mindfulness is either over-identification or repression. So over-identification is where the feelings of being blue and downhearted are so overwhelming that you don't even realize you're in them. It's like a big whirlwind and you're fully fused with it. Or repression is trying to push the difficulty away to the back of your mind so you're not really seeing it clearly. So that's mindfulness. So what we know is that these 3 key ingredients of self-compassion all work together, and they're all relevant to mental health. On the topic of self-kindness, I gave an example of the thoughts you use towards yourself, but also we can think about self-kindness in terms of how you feel. So self-kindness is a sense of warmth and friendship, openness in the body, versus tension, stress, negativity, and your behavioral choices. So if you make decisions in your actions that have your best interest at heart versus behaviors that perhaps aren't good for you or that make things worse, or self-sabotage. So self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness, 3 key ingredients of self-compassion. So why self-compassion? Why should we be aware of these things? Well, it's pretty clear. The research is quite powerful. In almost all studies, whenever we do research in this area, myself, a large number of colleagues throughout the world, we always find, and I've referenced 2 meta-analyses here which synthesize global data, all the data available to look at relationships between variables. What we know is self-compassion is a predictor of fewer psychological symptoms. So if you can be kind to yourself, on average, you are likely to experience less depression, less stress, less anxiety in your life. Likewise, not only will you have fewer psychological symptoms, self-compassionate people tend to have more frequent experiences of positive emotion like happiness, joy, curiosity, wonder, more positive emotion. They report greater satisfaction in life. So they feel like life is very much worth living and are satisfied with life. And also self-compassionate people tend to feel a sense of meaning in life. So feeling like life is purposeful and worth living in that sense of meaning. So self-compassion is good for your mental health. Also, and this is where my research focus lies, self-compassion becomes especially relevant during life's difficult moments when things don't go well. So when you're feeling like, say, you didn't do well at a presentation at work, or you didn't have the courage to make a phone call that you really needed to make, these kind of moments when you feel like you failed in some way, these are moments where we really can't rely on our self-esteem because we might not be feeling that good about ourselves. So self-esteem might not really be there. It's like a friend that's there when things are going well, but when things aren't going well, that's when you need a friend. Self-esteem you cannot rely on because you might not feel good about yourself. Unlike self-esteem, self-compassion becomes especially relevant during those difficult moments when things are not going well. So a lot of my research has looked at how people can cope with big major challenges in life, such as sickness, physical symptoms, and aging. And again, consistently we tend to find that those who are self-compassionate are resilient or able to manage challenges better than those people who beat themselves up and are not self-compassionate. Finally, I think this is really key, is that self-compassion is a learnable skill. So you might be hearing me talk and thinking to yourself, wow, I really beat myself up. I really can at times treat myself more like an enemy than a friend. Well, the good news is that that's not fixed. It's not set in stone because self-compassion is a learnable skill. And as I mentioned before, it's something that I have practiced over the years and perhaps got a little better at. And likewise, it's something that I work with to help clients. But the research also shows that through self-compassionate training programs, such as the Mindful Self-Compassion program, you can learn to be kinder towards yourself through practicing self-kindness in your daily life, and also through training your mind to be more mindful, more compassionate through targeted meditation practices. So because self-compassion is learnable, I think it's really worth researching because we can actually use our research findings to benefit others and to teach others how to be kinder towards themselves if we find that there is value to doing so. So self-compassion is important, I think, for these reasons. I won't dwell too long on these, but it's important to just address a couple of myths. I'll just briefly mention 3. Some people think that being hard on themselves helps them to achieve. Well, unfortunately, research doesn't, well, actually, fortunately, research does not support this hypothesis. So what we find is that self-compassion helps us to stay motivated during difficult tasks. So people will spend longer persevering with a challenging task if they're high in self-compassion compared to those high in self-criticism who are more likely to give up early, perhaps because their inner dialogue is just not very motivating. So in other words, you can think of self-compassion like being a really good running coach. A good running coach has your best interests in mind. They want you to run your personal best. But if you fall over and hurt your ankle, they're not going to say, oh, you idiot, I can't believe you did that. That's hopeless. Instead, they will provide hope, support, get you back on your feet, give you the treatment that you need so that you can get out there and run again as soon as possible. So self-compassion is a powerful motivator. Self-compassion is different from being selfish. So selfish people often lack the ingredient of common humanity. Rather than seeing themselves on an equal playing field as everybody else, they might see themselves as better than or more important than others. So self-compassion, when we see ourselves on an even playing field with others, we value our own well-being equally as we value the well-being of others. And also we know that those high in self-compassion don't have any less compassion for others. So it's not like there is a zero-sum game there. And the final myth I'll briefly touch on is self-compassion will make me feel sorry for myself. It will make me wallow in my difficulties. Once again, the research does not support this idea. In fact, self-compassionate people tend to dwell or kind of ruminate less on their difficulties compared to those low in self-compassion. And this protective factor of dwelling less on difficulties helps explain why self-compassion is good for your mental health. And I'll leave this for Ru to talk about in more detail, about why self-compassion might be especially important for autistic adults. But what I think is a very interesting research area that we really don't know much at all about yet, but autistic adults, through my clinical practice and work, I found face quite a few challenges. Perhaps they were not diagnosed early. Perhaps they found challenges relating to being autistic. They have sometimes thought that there was some kind of flaw or some kind of something wrong with them. And that might have been the message they got at school or from others. And that created a pattern of low self-worth. So for these reasons, we think that self-compassion might be especially relevant to autistic adults because there's such a value in learning to be kind to yourself, especially in a society that I think doesn't always understand autism very well. I'll leave Ru to talk more about this in her section. Thank you.
Hi Anna, thanks so much for taking the time to join us for this Q&A session today.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
Great, so let's first discuss your experience of self-compassion using the self-compassion model. So as Lydia mentioned, self-compassion consists of 3 components. One component is common humanity, which is realizing that everyone feels pain and makes mistakes. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions around common humanity. Firstly, do you feel as if you share similar experiences to other people? So in other words, do you think that the sorts of experiences that you have are in general are experiences that happen to other people?
So my initial feeling for that question was no, because being autistic has had a big impact on the way the world receives me and reacts to me. But then when I think about it, I think other people, a lot of the time, the way they behave towards you is more about them. And I think I do still have many similar experiences to other people. So maybe like 50-50. I think I still have similar experiences, as in the way other people might talk to me, because it's just how they talk, or the situations that I might encounter when I'm going out to do things in the world, because the world is not set up just for me. So a lot of the time, whatever I encounter, I guess a lot of other people are going to encounter as well. But I definitely feel like I experienced a lot of things differently to other people in terms of my hyper empathy and sensitized nervous system and lack of social understanding. So that's another way that, yeah, it just ends up about 50-50.
So for the similarities, would life experiences like going to work and having friends and then experiencing emotions like sadness, happiness, and joy, most people experience these, don't they? Like,
yeah, true. I wasn't even thinking about it in terms of that. I agree.
okay. Is it helpful for you when you're experiencing something difficult or upsetting to think that you are not the only person who has experienced this?
Yeah, when I think that, it makes me feel less alone, less anxious. I feel more reassured when I think that.
Right. I agree with you. Like, you feel like you're not the only person experiencing the situation. So you have shared experiences with other people. And it also makes us feel like it's not as bad as it seems, right?
Yep.
Right. Another component of self-compassion is kindness towards oneself. Let's delve deeper into self-kindness. How do you tend to react with yourself when you make mistakes, get things wrong, or don't succeed in the way that you have wanted?
First, I feel frustrated, but then I usually just kind of reassure myself that I did my best and that nothing really matters at all. So there's no need to get too upset.
Yeah, okay. And it sounds like you say things to yourself that reassures you.
Yeah, and also focusing on the fact that I did try. So feeling proud of myself for the effort that I put in, even if I didn't get the result that I wanted.
Okay. How about emotions that you feel in those moments when you make mistakes or don't succeed? So how do you feel towards yourself after that initial frustration?
Um, it depends on the situation. Like sometimes I might feel embarrassed if other people have seen my failure, but then I kind of reassure myself and just switch off from it a bit. I'm very big on not judging myself.
Okay. Can you think of any positives to being able to forgive yourself and not judging yourself?
Yeah, I feel better about myself. Because when I was younger, I used to be very hard on myself, and my mind was just like hell. It was really unpleasant to live in that mental environment, and it's just a lot more pleasant and peaceful to be gentle on yourself.
Absolutely. I find that when you're kind towards yourself, you get over the difficult moments a bit quicker. It doesn't mean you don't learn from your mistakes.
Yeah, it also makes it easier, and it makes me more confident to try things as well because I'm not beating myself up over everything.
Right, that makes a lot of sense because you're not afraid you're going to fail next time. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to the final component of self-compassion, which is mindful awareness. Mindful awareness is when we are aware of our thoughts and feelings in a non-judgmental manner, sort of kind of what you talked about, not being judgmental about yourself. How easy or hard do you find to separate yourself from your thoughts and feelings to be able to be objective?
It depends on the situation. So, if it's a situation where I'm not as directly involved, then it's pretty easy. But if it's a situation that I'm very involved in, it's so hard. Yeah, I really, really find that hard.
Okay. Do you find that when you're having more negative emotions like frustration, sadness, anxiety, or when you're a bit depressed, that it's more difficult for you to separate yourself from your thoughts and feelings?
Um, I think the hardest one to separate myself from is anxiety and anger, but even happy emotions is hard to separate myself from. I find it really hard to be objective in the moment.
Right. So it's kind of getting absorbed in the moment and the emotions that you're feeling.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to ask you some more general questions about your self-compassion experiences. Is it easy for you to be self-compassionate?
Yes, it is easy for me to be self-compassionate.
Why do you think that's the case?
Because I've spent a long time practicing it.
How long have you been practicing self-compassion?
I would say maybe about 5 years.
Okay, 5 years. Do you remember what prompted you to start this practice?
I can't remember the details, but I know that I've always been constantly searching for different ways to improve my life. And so I'm always reading advice about things you can try. So when I read about self-compassion, I started practicing it, which initially felt kind of stupid because it felt fake. But I just kept trying it anyway. And then gradually it just started to become automatic. And now it's not really something I have to think about. I mean, I do still push myself to do it, but yeah, it's a little more automatic now.
Okay. So sounds like it's not as hard because you've developed the skill to be more self-compassionate.
Yeah, it's become a habit.
Okay. You've mentioned that you have been practicing self-compassion for 5 years. What are some of these practices?
So actively noticing and pointing out to myself when I see other people making mistakes or not being perfect as a reassurance to myself that it's really not a big deal. Self-soothing myself when I do make a mistake or feel upset, not judging myself for anything. And a big one is praising myself whenever I do things that are hard. Even if I feel that I did something awkward or silly, instead of beating myself up, I actually turn it around and praise myself for being brave enough to even put myself in the position to embarrass myself. Because really, if something is difficult, scary, stressful, and you do it anyway, you should be proud of yourself. Like that is a sign of true strength. So I really bathe myself in the positive feelings when I do something I'm proud of by actively holding on to it for like about 10 to 30 seconds in order to strengthen that tendency for positivity in my brain and rewire the pathways. And that's something I got from an interview I read a few years ago with a neuroscientist.
Wow, that's really insightful, Anna. Thanks so much for sharing those practices. I think it'll be really helpful for everyone to practice these. Yeah, and like having that courage to be brave. I think it's amazing. Having practiced self-compassion for the last few years, are there any benefits to practicing self-compassion?
Yeah, it changed my life.
In what ways has it changed your life?
I used to be depressed and more anxious, more timid. It's not the main thing in my life, but I would say that it is probably the most important because it's kind of given a foundation for everything else to build on.
Right. So it sounds like practicing self-compassion has been a positive change in your life.
Yeah.
When I was interviewing another autistic woman who experienced a late autism diagnosis, she said, and this is her direct quote, I could have been more self-compassionate if I was diagnosed with autism earlier. So Anna, you were also diagnosed with autism later in life. I'm curious to find out, how did this late diagnosis impact how compassionate you were towards yourself?
I think that I was very hard on myself because I grew up being told that everything I did was wrong and stupid. So I thought so, and I believed it. And so I was just used to thinking and assuming that everything I did was wrong. So self-compassion is kind of doing a total 180 on that and learning to think completely the opposite way. It's improved my sleep, everything, like all the unhealthy stuff that you get taught as an autistic person and reversing it.
Right. So it sounds like practicing self-compassion has improved your overall well-being. Do you think practicing self-compassion could benefit other autistic adults?
Yeah, because there's a lot of trauma and internalized ableism in the autistic community. So people get very reactive to each other because of that trauma. I've found that self-compassion has really helped with my own trauma because I have that ability to self-soothe. I've become a lot less reactive and I can calm myself down enough to stop panicking and think rationally to get myself out of the panic. Also, because as I was talking to you at the beginning of this interview, being autistic really affects how people react to you. It's unfortunately very normal to have people treating you like an idiot when you're autistic, or being really hard on you for your mistakes. So it's essential to be able to be understanding and kind towards yourself if you're not getting it from the world around you. Not only does it provide you with emotional resilience, but self-worth just seemed to build naturally as I learned to be kind and nurturing to myself. It makes you realize when you are kind to yourself and care about yourself, that you need to get away from people who judge you so harshly, and realize how toxic they are, because you stop internalizing their reaction to you and you see it as a problem with them instead. And it really helps to start undoing the enormous damage that ableism causes to our mental health. So yeah, there's just so many benefits to self-compassion, and the harder life is on someone, the more benefit it potentially has for them. And life has been really hard on a lot of autistic people.
Thank you so much, Anna, for sharing these personal experiences. They've been very valuable, I think, to hear.
Thank you.
Before discussing about ARCAP's self-compassion study, I thought it would be good to provide you with some background information. Anna has mentioned that she used to be a lot more depressed and anxious prior to practicing self-compassion. Many autistic individuals have at least one mental health or neurodevelopmental condition like ADHD. We know that as a group, autistic adults have poorer mental health when compared with non-autistic adults, up to 70% for depression and 84% for anxiety. As you can see in this figure, the rates are quite high. This is especially true for adults without intellectual disability. Both anxiety and depression have significant negative impact on health and well-being. For example, anxiety symptoms are associated with greater loneliness, negative automatic thoughts, and behavioral problems such as aggression and self-injury. Depression symptoms equally impact negatively on people's quality of life and are associated with loss of interest in activities, decreasing adaptive functioning, loss of appetite, sleep problems, and suicidal ideation. Although there is emergent evidence that mental health interventions such as cognitive behavioral therapies, or CBT, and mindfulness-based therapies are effective for autistic adults, not all adults have access to adequate mental health services. Researchers Cambrosby and colleagues surveyed 200 autistic adults without intellectual disability about their experiences of treatment and support for mental health problems. They found that treatment were not effective for everyone. Almost 20% of participants felt that their mental health issues were not appropriately treated. A similar proportion of adults thought that treatments and supports provided were not fit for purpose. So for example, when an autistic client interpreted the verbal communications from their clinician in a literal manner, the clinician thought that this client had a defense mechanism. 11% of participants thought that CBT was not an effective treatment for them. This poor access to adequate and suitable mental health services have prompted researchers to examine different ways of delivering mental health treatments and develop new approaches to improve the mental health of autistic individuals. Some clinicians and researchers have criticized this traditional approach to mental health care. This criticism is not only about the mental health care of autistic individuals, but for everybody. So the current mental health care approach is heavily influenced by the view that mental difficulties come as diagnosable disorders. These disorders can be treated by clinicians who apply evidence-based practices that aim to reduce symptoms of mental illnesses. This approach of mental health care is now under pressure because it is often disconnected from client needs, ignores the transdiagnostic nature of mental difficulties, and overestimates the appropriateness or effectiveness of treatments for all clients. There's a growing understanding that mental illnesses are seldom cured, and it's better to think about mental illnesses as psychological vulnerabilities. And well-being can be achieved when we learn to live with our mental vulnerabilities through a slow process of strengthening resilience. So in other words, instead of aiming to reduce mental symptoms alone, we should focus on increasing positive emotions, acceptance, and developing resilience. By increasing resilience, symptoms associated with mental illnesses like anxiety and depression will automatically reduce. One approach to strengthening resilience is to foster self-compassion skills. As Lydia mentioned, research shows that practicing self-compassion in non-autistic people can improve their mental health. We think that cultivating self-compassion can also be helpful to autistic youth and adults. Lydia and I shared our thoughts in this paper published in the journal Autism in Adulthood. We discussed approaches to cultivating self-compassion and provided recommendations for future research. If you would like a copy of the paper, please feel free to email me after the webinar. I've put my email on the slide. In this paper, we also talked about, as a first step, we need to find out if self-compassion is associated with mental health in autistic individuals. So that's why I've been running an ARCAP research study aiming to understand the self-compassion experiences of autistic adults. Here are my colleagues who are supporting me on this project. Lydia, you've already met. The project team also consists of Vicky, Abby, and Ainsley from ARCAP. In terms of the study procedure, we first obtained approval on the study proposal from the ACA committee, consisting of a number of autistic adults. And then we designed the study in a lot of detail, including what are the survey questions and interview questions. And then we obtained approval from the Human Ethics Committee based at the University of Sydney. To recruit participants, we share the study with local and international groups. So we surveyed both autistic and non-autistic participants who are adults. And then we also invited autistic participants to be interviewed. And then finally, I conducted some preliminary analysis. We have collected a range of information from the participants via the online survey, including background information such as age, gender identity, and their autism diagnosis, or if they self-identify, whether or not they self-identified as autistic. We measured people's self-compassion levels through a short form of the self-compassion scale developed by Dr. Kristen Neff. We also measured people's mental health and well-being through 3 other scales. Our study's participants were 150 autistic adults and 120 non-autistic adults. Of the 150 autistic adults, 36 self-identified as autistic, and the rest reported a clinical diagnosis of autism. The majority of people in both groups identified as women. Participants were aged between 18 and 75 years. I have conducted some preliminary statistical analysis, and I wanted to share some of the key findings with you today. These are Violin plots which show the self-compassion scores of autistic and non-autistic adults. So the height of the plots indicate the spread of the self-compassion scores. If you compare the 2 charts, you can see that the spread of the scores is wider for the non-autistic group. The width of the chart shows the proportion of people who scored at that particular point. So for the non-autistic group, most participants scored between 60 and 120 on the self-compassion scale. In contrast, most autistic participants scored between 40 to 90. So we can conclude that overall, the autistic adults as a group scored lower on the self-compassion scale compared with the non-autistic group. On the right, these 2 Violin charts show the scores on the well-being measure for the non-autistic and autistic groups. And again, overall, the autistic participants scored lower on the positive well-being measure. for the mental health measures, our autistic participants scored much higher on the symptoms of anxiety and depression, as you can see here on these violin charts. So the group differences on all 4 measures, the self-compassion, well-being, anxiety and depression, were statistically significant. Apart from group differences, I also wanted to check if there were associations between self-compassion scores and other variables in our group of autistic participants. And the correlation analysis showed that there were statistical significant associations between self-compassion scores with age, anxiety, depression, and well-being. So specifically, people with higher levels of self-compassion were younger in age, had lower symptoms of both anxiety and depression, and had higher levels of well-being. The people did not differ on their self-compassion levels across the 3 gender identities, which were women, men, and non-binary or other. Now that we've taken the first step to find out the relationship between self-compassion and mental health, what's next? Well, even though Lydia, Anna, and I are advocates of self-compassion practices, we currently do not have enough information to make clinical recommendations due to the lack of research evidence. That's why, for the next step, it would be important to find out if we can improve people's mental health through self-compassion-based supports. We think that self-compassion practices can be self-directed and implemented without the assistance of mental health providers for some people, but not others with trauma histories or severe mental illnesses. So for example, while self-compassion based meditations can be a powerful way to help people increase self-compassion, meditation can sometimes trigger negative emotions, especially for those who are psychologically vulnerable. That's why professional support from a trained clinician may be helpful to facilitate the training in self-compassion based meditation for some autistic individuals. Lydia and I have started brainstorming some ideas for a research study to examine the effectiveness of self-compassion based supports for autistic adults. So we thought we could run a group workshop via Zoom or another online platform. The groups will be kept small, so around 3 to 4 people. The sessions could run on a weekly basis for 6 to 8 weeks. And during the sessions, we could teach people meditation techniques to improve self-compassion. We can use guided meditation audio so people can practice at home. And we could also introduce daily self-compassion practices. These practices are similar to what Anna has described for herself. So practices like using reassuring inner speech and self-soothing techniques when we make mistakes or feel upset. We could also introduce daily homework activities to help people develop a habit of using self-compassion skills. In case some workshop participants are triggered while doing the self-compassion practices, we could provide one-on-one support to individuals through a clinician. So these are just some of our initial ideas. Please let us know if you have any thoughts or comments about these. I wanted to end this webinar with a poem on self-compassion written by Dr. Sir Derek Walcott. So the poem goes, "The time will come when with elation you will greet yourself arriving at your own door, in your own mirror, and each will smile at each other's welcome and say, 'Sit here, eat.' You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who has loved you all your life, whom you ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit, feast on your life." Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much to our presenters for making the time to put the video together. And thanks to everybody for such a really interesting Q&A through the chat as we go. But there's been some really interesting commentary in the chat. I know Karen asked some interesting questions around the opposite of mindfulness and issues around over-identification. Lauren asked questions around self-compassion and issues around internalized ableism, and I think that was a theme that really came through the presentation today. And Evie asked questions around whether self-compassion can be strengthened through collective identity, particularly with the autistic community connectedness. So I think there's been some really interesting thinking going. And Ru, always love a poem as part of a presentation. I think that that's fantastic. We do have a few questions as well. So Evie also asked particularly around masking. So the question I think was, is masking counterproductive for self-compassion? And I think I'll go to Anna first, if you could perhaps talk a little bit to that, and then maybe I'll go to Lydia and then to Ru. Anna.
Yep. Hi. Hi, Evie. So I think that is actually a bit of a complicated question, because there's times when masking is necessary for our safety, or it's just an easier way to get our needs met. So at times when we're masking out a feeling that we're not good enough, then I would say masking is counterproductive to self-compassion. For me, self-compassion is accepting that some people won't accept me for looking disabled or weird. And that's their problem, not mine. So their reaction is a reflection of how they would respond to anybody different. It's not personal about me, and I don't have to care what they think. Sometimes though, like I said, it is safer to mask in some environments, and I would say that that is being compassionate to oneself. Sometimes I do mask in situations where I'm low on spoons and I just need to get through something quickly. And again, I think that's perfectly compassionate to myself as well.
Super. Thank you, Anna. That was really clear. Lydia, was there something that you wanted to add around masking being counterproductive?
Look, I think that what Anna said, I think she really summarised everything. I think that, you know, her answer was great. There's not much I can add, other than, you know, think about, is masking net positive or net negative? If it serves some kind of function, then perhaps it can be helpful. But if you're doing it from a place, I'm really just reiterating what Anna said, if you're doing it from a place of I'm not good enough, then that's not helpful. And we need to think about, well, how can I do masking in a way that helps me to still feel worthy and like a good enough person. So masking is not like we're covering up some kind of defect. That's not what masking is. Masking is more like a tool that we use. It's got nothing to do with who we are. It's something that we use. It helps us get by in the world, but it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with us, if that makes sense. It's not covering up some sort of inadequacy. That's not what masking is.
Yeah, fantastic. No, that's good. That's really clear. Ru, was there anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, just very briefly, because I think Anna and Lydia covered everything, but it's more seeing masking as a tool rather than having to do it all the time. So having that choice is really important. And if people feel like you don't have a choice, but you have to mask, then that's probably not going to be healthy. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. I'm just going to squeeze in one more quick question before we finish up, which I think came from Alison. The question was, I think if I can ask Lydia and Ru, do you think that autistic adults might need a little bit more support or time to learn self-compassion skills if they're starting from a different baseline?
Absolutely. I think that graph makes me feel quite sad to see that autistic adults on average have lower self-compassion than others. But it also doesn't surprise me, because our culture, it has not been, I think, very friendly to autistic adults, and there are so many misunderstandings. And I think that's why autistic adults have lower self-compassion. So of course, there are things that we need to do on the society level, but also things autistic adults maybe need to do in their community, and what autistic adults might have to do on an individual level with more assistance to build self-compassion.
Sure.
There's so much work to do.
Yeah. Ru?
Yeah, so Alison, like as you've shown, like as you've seen on the diagram, that overall as a group, autistic adults have lower self-compassion. So people may need more time, like in terms of support to kind of build up that skill set. So I think you're right.
Yeah. I just wanted to thank everybody for coming along today. We've had a really good session, I think, with lots of good commentary around. And this will be, the ARCAP webinar series will continue long into the future as well. So hopefully we'll see you all again. Thank you so much.